Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESG-CV. My name is LaQuantia Goodman, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. Office hours recordings are on the California ESG-CV past trainings webpage. A copy of the slide deck and recording will also be emailed to you. Next slide. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered in the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESG-CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the question and answer session. Next slide. Today's session will include the following: ESG and ESG-CV updates, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and ESG-CV question and answer, and today's spotlight session, building a bridge to avoid the cliff, continuing housing and services after ESG-CV. Next slide. This slide contains ESG policy documents, and you'll be able to click and access all of these or any at your convenience once you receive the slide deck. Next slide. The ESG team representatives are Diana, Giovanni, Tuesday, and Anthony. Please reach out to your ESG representatives listed above or contact us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Next slide. And now for our ESG-CV updates. Reminders for performance milestones. All program funds for projects, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, all must be expended by September 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. All final requests for funds must be submitted to the department no later than November 15th, 2023. Next slide. Upcoming office hours. On April 5th, de-escalation. April 12th, emergency shelter policy and shelter inspection reports. April 19th, new client file checklist. And April 26th, leases, habitability, and lead. Please use the training site to register for office hours or the link to view past trainings. Next slide. Upcoming trainings in April. On April 4th, we'll have Evaluating Client Eligibility, a new and non-traditional provider series. This series is designed to be an introduction to client eligibility under the ESG and ESG-CV program components of emergency shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention. Next slide. Also in April, on April 7th, low barrier emergency shelter, which will discuss exactly what it means to be ESG and ESG-CV shelters to be low barrier. And on April 11th, hiring people with lived experience. The session will review the concept of lived experience and lived expertise and share how organizations work to center and integrate PLE into decision-making, advocacy, and systems. Next slide. May 2nd, Documenting Costs, New and Non-Traditional Provider Series, a session that will cover all the basics needed to successfully submit an RFF to California HCD for payment. And May 10th, Data-Driven Decision-Making, a community workshop that will explore the use of data in everything from program design to racial equity. Do we have any questions right now? Don't see that we have any questions right now, but if you have any questions in the future, please feel free to reach out to your annual ESG rep or to esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov or to your ESG-CV grant administrator. Next slide. We will now turn our attention to our Spotlight series, Building a Bridge to Avoid the Cliff, with Heather, Chris, and Amber.
Thank you, LaQuantia, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I am Chris Pitcher from ICF. I am the Training and Technical Assistance Lead for the California HCD ESG-CV project, and happy to have you with us today to talk about the impending cliff that the end of ESG-CV is close. We can see it actually. So we're going to talk about how we can avoid all those services that we've created through the ESG-CV program just kind of going away. I'll be talking today with my co-presenter Heather and also Amber. So Heather, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Chris. Great to see everybody today. Thanks again. Echo Chris's thanks for being here. Important conversation across the country right now. So thank you for being in this one with us. My name is Heather Dillashaw. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with ICF and I'm the project director for California HCD's ESG-CV implementation. Amber, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Amber Ostrander. I work at Cal ICH. I'm the Chief of Grant Operations and Support there.
Great. Thanks, Amber. So I will be starting off today's presentation, just kind of talking about ESG-CV, just grounding us in that. Heather's going to talk through what we need to do to begin thinking about planning for the closeout of our project. And Amber is going to finish us off with, well, we have flexible state funds. Can that help? Can that be part of our planning discussion? So that's what we're going to do this morning. Next slide, please. All right, so want to just kind of remind ourselves how we got here. ESG-CV is an outcropping of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or also known as CARES, that was passed in 2020. It provided a lot of money to the state of California and nationally $4 billion in supplemental ESG funding. It did fundamentally change ESG to be ESG-CV for at least 1 year. With all this extra money, it also gave us a bunch of extra flexibilities that I will be talking through. Remember that the ESG-CV project was really meant to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, and really helping folks not contract the disease and not die from it either. And we really focused a lot in, helping our unsheltered folks find non-congregate shelter and decompressing our emergency shelters and having alternate places for folks to be, because we know housing is healthcare. So very large, huge supplemental funding. Typically, we get around $15 million annually through ESG, and this was $319 million. So huge increase in funding for the state of California for ESG-CV. Next slide. Just a reminder of where we fit in this, because it is complicated in the state of California. ESG and ESG-CV operate in the same flow. We get money from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or we just call them HUD, as the federal funder. Annually, they give us ESG. One time they give us ESG-CV. The state of California HCD, Housing Community Development, who we work with, is the recipient of $319 million. And then we hand that money to subrecipients, which are units of local government, our COCs, and there's another layer that I didn't put on here, which is the sub-subs, which where many of you are. You're the folks actually receiving funding from your subrecipients and carrying out the activities. We do have some subrecipients that do their own activities, but most employ, if not all, but most of the money to a lot of different subrecipients that are not on this page. Next slide. All right, why is this special? Other than huge amount of funding, we just saw yesterday that the COC funding for 2022 came out, and that was $2.76 billion. This is $4 billion, and this $4 billion was put on the ESG program instead of the COC program because of our ability to do housing as in rapid rehousing, but also shelter where folks needed that during the pandemic. This is the largest single allocation of federal money dedicated to homelessness that we've ever seen, which is impressive because, as I said, every year, $2.76 billion that goes towards COC programs, but ESG is a much smaller program. Despite the fact that ESG is smaller and ESG-CV is quite large, we have waived a lot of requirements because the ESG program has a lot of requirements to it. We talk about them every week here. So you're mostly all familiar with that, but there are a lot of things that made it difficult or potentially dangerous during COVID. So we do have many waivers that we'll talk to briefly. I'm not going to get to them in too much detail because we've been talking about them for several years. But that was something that made it special. We did try to eliminate some of that annual ESG regulations to make things easier. We also had new and creative uses of to reduce the impact of COVID-19. We have landlord incentives, we have hazard pay, lots of other stuff that I'll talk through in the next few slides, but giving us the ability to do different things, buying personal protective equipment, PPE, things we didn't quite have in the annual ESG program. And just like you all did at your subrecipient level, the state of California was trying to be innovative and thoughtful with this large amount of funding, keeping folks safe in shelter, and also focusing very heavily on the one housing project we have, which is rapid rehousing. We really wanted folks to get into housing because permanent housing and long-term housing is the goal that we have for all of our project types. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk specifically to us here in California. We have 319 million. We had 315 and change, and then we had a few $1 million. I think it was 2.8 or 3.8 that was added in reallocated funds from other slower spender communities. So we have $319 million as of now for us to provide to the ESG-CV funding. We provided that funding across 49 community entities. That's recipients, subrecipients, some of those are tribal nations, and across almost 240 projects. But what's interesting to note here on this slide is how we distributed our funding. So typically in an annual ESG environment, street outreach is around 2 to 3%. We have almost 9% going towards street outreach, which is an increase. That's very good for us because folks on the street were the most at risk, and we needed to have projects set up and funded that could go out and reach those folks and help them obtain either shelter or housing. You see the half of our funding pretty much goes to emergency shelter. That was a lot of non-congregate shelters or temporary shelters or fixing shelters that we did. This is a higher number than we would like to see, but it was also the necessity of the pandemic required us, as we had to decompress the amount of folks in our traditional shelters. We had to do non-congregate shelters, and the state of California with Project Room Key and now Project Home Key, we're embracing the non-congregate shelter model more so than any other state I work in. So we do have a lot of funding in that space that may need to be maintained. We were very proud of the fact that we have 30% of our funding going to rapid rehousing. That was a deliberate attempt from the state to get as much rapid rehousing funding out there as we could. And right now we're sitting at 31%. Hopefully that rises a little bit as budgets change. But rapid rehousing, obviously our permanent supportive housing option through ESG-CV, really wanted to focus on that, and the numbers bear that out, which is the opposite of the next project, which is homelessness prevention. We have less than 1% homelessness prevention. That is atypical nationally. A lot of folks have put much more towards homelessness prevention, but this again was a directive from the state saying we don't want to put money in homelessness prevention. It's not only a difficult project to run, but we have other assets. The EREP program, which is now gone, and other state programs that were much more flexible than the ESG-CV homelessness prevention. So we have very little money in that, and very little that we're going to have to save as far as a project type that needs to go continue. You see the HMIS system, Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, we have about 2.3438%, which is pretty average, which means we did increase a bit of our HMIS capacity because HMIS was asked to do more for ESG-CV than they are typical for annual ESG, creating bundles. My HMIS folks out there know exactly what I'm talking about. A little bit more work, so it is a little bit more funding. So as we think about sustaining HMIS, we might want to consider using some of our other state flexible funds for HMIS. As AB 977 rolls out, as other state programs begin to use HMIS, I see our HMIS staffs being stretched very, very thin in the state of California. So it is something to kind of keep in mind. Administration, we had up to 10%. We've only used 8.4%. That is above the typical 7.5%, which is going to be harder for us to find ways to keep going through annual ESG. So another place. So when we look at this list, we have more ESG, we have more money in street outreach than we had prior. We have more money in shelter and rapid housing than we had prior, way less in homelessness prevention, a little bit more in HMIS, and a little bit more in administration. So those are the type of activities we need to consider. Which of these do we want to continue post ESG-CV? Next slide. All right, so I'm not going to go through this in great detail. You're going to get these slides afterwards, but I'm just going to highlight a few things. We do have a lot of new activities, things that we could not fund before through annual ESG. And since annual ESG does not have this flexibility, these are things that if we want to keep doing, we need to find alternative sources of funding for. Temporary emergency shelter, hazard pay, hand washing stations and other personally protective equipment. Landlord incentives being a big one. I don't have the data on how much we've done in landlord incentives, but it is one of the things that set ESG-CV rapid rehousing apart from other rapid rehousing, where we could pay a little bit more for landlords to be incentivized to work with us. So that's something you might want to think about. We also have vaccine incentives. You can see the rest of the list that are activities that once ESG-CV ends, ESG cannot pick these things up. So we need to find other ways to do so. Next slide. All right, I'm going to talk about each component, not too much detail because y'all run this, but want to talk about each of those components in a little bit more detail just to make sure we're on the same page as far as what components we have and what components we might want to plan for continuing post ESG-CV. Next slide. Street outreach, again, about a little bit more street outreach than we have had in typical annual ESG to reach out to folks in unsheltered situations. Obviously, we have a lot of unsheltered situations happening across California, so street outreach is a very important type of project for us to have, not only now, but post ESG-CV. It is critical for us, though, that ESG and ESG-CV street outreach not just focus on survival skills or survival items. We really see our street outreach as the connection of folks who are in an unhoused situation getting housed, whether that is getting into shelter, getting into non-congregate shelter, or ideally getting into rapid rehousing and being permanently housed. That is what we want our street outreach programs to do. So if you have street outreach programs that have been operating in this manner and been highly successful, that is an opportunity to continue that either with annual ESG funding or with other flexible state funds. So again, housing-focused street outreach, those models that you've built or have expanded, those are things you might want to consider under your street outreach program. I'm next going to talk about emergency shelter, I believe. Next slide. So obviously, emergency shelter, we have congregate emergency shelters that we've typically always had in ESG. But we also had a huge influx of non-congregate shelters through the ESG-CV funding. Almost half of our money went through shelter, and a lot of that was for non-congregate shelter, whether that was supporting a Project Room Key a project that needed other funding, whether it was developing your own just non-congregate shelter that looked kind of like a Project Room Key. It could be working with a Project Home Key that is still doing a non-congregate shelter. But it's immediate access to shelter to avoid contracting and perishing from COVID. Having the ability to provide case management. This is a key hallmark for emergency shelter in the state of California. We do not warehouse people, we want to house people. So we want to see robust shelters that have a lot of case management to help folks move to housing, move out of shelter and into a permanent housing situation. So that's the type of projects you might want to consider funding still, where we have the need for shelters to actually house folks and not just keep folks in there. We also always have some funding going to shelter operations, which have gone up. The non-congregate shelter model does have different operations and essential service cost models, because not everyone is in one place, so it takes a lot more effort to get out to folks. So think about those as you're sunsetting some of these ESG shelter projects and what you would like to keep. Note that most of the work that we've seen in this and nationally was using hotel motels, and that is something that California embraced much more than almost any other state, with your room keys, your home keys, and the use of our ESG-CV to support these projects. Next slide. Rapid rehousing. Nothing makes us happier than these words, because it is the only permanent housing option we have through ESG-CV. And this is focused on getting folks who are literally homeless or fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence into a permanent housing situation. We have the ability to do housing relocation and stabilization services. Case management is also heavy on this, which is something you might want to continue to support, and obviously the rental assistance that we have. This rapid rehousing will fit very nicely into annual ESG. There's just not a lot of funding. Also fit nice into a lot of our programs are close enough and can be modified to be COC funded, or using your flexible HUD, your flexible non-HUD funding in the state of California to keep these rapid rehousing programs going. Next slide. Homelessness prevention. Again, we didn't fund much of this, so there shouldn't be a lot of planning around saving a bunch of homeless prevention programs funded through ESG-CV, because it's only 0.22% of our budget. And most of that was done early on and isn't currently being accomplished through ESG-CV. But this is preventing folks from actually entering the homeless service system, keeping folks housed. This is not eviction prevention. This is homelessness prevention. So folks who are facing a housing crisis but are likely to become homeless. Because of the way that we have looked at homelessness prevention through ESG-CV, we've seen a shift nationally. We've seen a shift locally, where homelessness prevention is really about targeting to the most vulnerable. We had the ability to raise the income level to 50% through ESG-CV. We did not do so. We are still at 30%. Because most evictions do not result in homelessness. So we're not seeing a huge need in this area, but definitely something to consider around what you've done with homelessness prevention. Next slide. HMIS. I did mention HMIS a little bit, and I just want to kind of talk through it one more time, that this obviously pays for the operation of your HMIS data entry, whether you need equipment, that kind of stuff, with about 2% staying rather static for HMIS. We didn't see a huge increase, but with all of the other things happening around HMIS in the state of California, our interaction with HDIS, our interaction with AB 977 and bringing on a bunch of new state programs, HMIS staff is going to be taxed. So figuring out a way to use other either ESG or other flexible funds to continue to support and maybe increase their HMIS capacity is not necessarily a bad thing. Last slide is going to be a fast slide. All right, so just quickly, these are all the components back in front of you, just so you remember them. Street outreach, shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid housing, HMIS. Admin, there's not really much we can do about that. That's a kept thing, so I kept it off this slide. But these are the components we want to think about keeping, and I really focus on rapid housing, street outreach, shelter, and HMIS as those activities that we really want to see successful models continue through ESG, annual ESG, or through flexible state funding once ESG-CV sunsets. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather on the next slide to talk about what we're going to do as far as getting ready for the end of ESG-CV.
Thanks, Chris. So as I'm sure you all know, because almost all of you, if not all of you, have worked with other federal funds as well. Closeout means a lot of different things for federal grants. And so we want to go through a little bit about what that's going to look like as that starts happening. Next slide, please, Taylor. So for HUD grants, and for those of you that also have entitlement ESG-CV funds, this is obviously also relevant for you in that instance. In this instance, when we're talking about the state funds, this is ultimately the state's responsibility, and at the same time, you all have to do these things so that the state can report on them, right? So all eligible activities are complete, meaning every activity that was funded under the grant has been completed, all money expended. All grant funds are drawn and activities are closed out in IDIS, so all drawn down from the federal system. So that would be for state funds, HCD does that on your behalf. All beneficiary data is accurately entered in HMIS, and this is critical, right? This has everything to do with how y'all are doing data entry for HMIS. As you know, the reporting for ESG-CV is different than for annual ESG. The quarterly reporting that we are doing for ESG-CV includes the beneficiary data in the bundles that are uploaded to Sage by your HMIS leads. All of that has to be accurately entered and done before the grant can be closed out. All audit and monitoring issues affecting the grant have to be resolved. Many of you are currently experiencing or have experienced being monitored by us right now, and if you have not, you will be soon. So some of you have had things that we do have to resolve in order for the grant to close out, and so we will continue to work with you on those things. This next one around personal property and real property acquired does not generally come into play with annual ESG because there's not enough money to buy property. However, with ESG-CV funds, because they have been so big, many of you have been able to do large equipment purchases, outreach vehicles, those kinds of things. And so one of the things that will be looked at, and you are monitored if you haven't been, is that you have policies and procedures that are in compliance with this position from the Federal Register. That will be very important because HCD will have to continue to track that. And then HCD will submit the final quarterly report in Sage after they draw everything out of IDIS. Next slide. Okay, so a lot of the things in the next few slides are really pretty common sense, but we find it helpful when we're planning these things with communities to have it written down so that when you get these slides, they can help you. Hopefully, if you haven't started these conversations at the community level, this will help give you some framework to do that. So there are things you have to figure out on the financial side, and there's things you have to figure out on the participant side with your clients, and there are things you have to figure out with your staff, right? So there's lots of different pieces of this, and with your community partners, sorry, that's the other one. So you have to think about spend down timing so that you are on track to expend all of your funds by September 30th. There are a handful of you who have additional allocated funds who have a little bit longer deadline, but most of you September 30th. What does that look like when those funds are expended for the programs and the people that they are supporting? Again, client, staffing, and community partners all can be affected by those things, right? Next slide. Partner and community issues. If you do not have existing interagency agreements or care coordination meetings, those kinds of things, this is a great time to start having those conversations. So for example, if your program is going to be closing down or greatly decreasing the number of clients you can serve, the other folks in your community that you work with need to know that, right? The folks that are being served by our programs generally are being served by more than one agency and more than one funding stream. So communication is key across the board, right? Again, back to the compliance pieces that we've talked through multiple weeks now over the last couple of years. All of those things need to be checked off too. Next slide. So one of the things we recommend as you're having these community conversations and working with your partners about how funding continuity could happen is you need to figure out how you've been spending. If you haven't done this already, how much are you spending per household, right? How much are you spending per program? And think through what it would look like to support that level ongoing or a portion of that level ongoing with other funds and other possibilities for partnerships for the folks that have been served by ESG-CV funds. There's a link in here about transfer considerations, specifically around rapid rehousing that's on the HUD Exchange. So that link will be live when you get these slides. And so that's worth checking out as well. Next slide. So a couple of things, and again, we know this is common sense, but it's helpful to have it written down sometimes, is that there are two different pieces, right? Like you need to think about length of time someone is being assisted, meaning when's the last time you can enroll, when's the last date you can enroll somebody and still have those funds expended by September 30th. So that's one consideration. And then the cost, right? Like between now and September 30th, with what you have, are your budget projections still on track, or do you need to adjust those? Next slide. Don't forget your landlords, right? You may have been using landlord incentives. Think through how to continue doing that. So the landlords that have been super great about housing folks through ESG-CV funds will continue to do that with other funding streams. And then staffing, I mentioned that a little earlier, but obviously people have staffed up with ESG-CV funds, and it has provided a level of service across the country, but definitely in California as well, that we haven't seen in homeless services. So what does it look like to continue to provide that staffing or to transfer folks to other programs? Because the need has not gone away, right? So what does it look like to have those conversations with your staff and plan for the end of the CV funds coming into your community? Next slide. And again, super important to have these conversations with program participants in a really considerate, trauma-informed way, right? Like, it can be very scary for them to think about this thing they've relied on is going away. So please, take care when having those conversations, connect with them, do it in plenty of time, make sure that expectations are clear, remind them of the other supports that are available to them, and think through what that conversation is, right? Don't just say, hey, we're stopped. This funding is over. I don't know what you're going to do next. Try and have a problem-solving conversation, right? Have a problem-solving conversation both with your clients and with your community partners about how you continue to support folks in need. Next slide. And again, the partner piece, and Amber's going to talk more about this as it relates to some state funds, but there are lots of partners in your community, right? Public funds are one source, and California has a lot of public funds coming to support homelessness and those who are at risk of homelessness. There are also other folks in your community, right, that also serve many of the same folks. So decide who you should be having this conversation with. Maybe have a regular coordination meeting, talk through what services could be continued, could be added, where participants can go, and think about how this affects communication across agencies too, right? If your program's ending, you need to figure out what your communication plan is to talk to other folks who serve the same population, how it's going to affect them as well. Next slide, please. Okay, that's the end for me. I'm going to hand it over to Amber.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, so today I am here to talk about the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Grant Program, also known as HAP or HHAP. Again, my name is Amber Ostrander. I work at Cal ICH, formerly known as Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, which you'll see on these slides because we are reusing them and they haven't been updated. So first next slide, please. First I want to talk about what HAP funding is. There's currently 4 rounds of HAP totaling nearly $3 billion. So HAP funds large cities with 300,000 plus population, counties, and continuums of care. So currently rounds 1 through 3 have been dispersed into the communities, and we are getting close to making the first disbursement for HAP round 4. I do have a comparison chart of all the different rounds because while they are very similar, there are slight variations. And I will put that in the chat now, just so if anybody is interested in seeing those different areas. So hopefully you'll be able to get that chat link. If not, I'll make sure I put it in the chat. Okay, so one thing, next slide, please. Sorry about that. So one thing to keep in mind about HAP funding, and we say this all the time, I'm sure you all are aware, is HAP funding is extremely flexible. That is kind of the theme of HAP funding. Flexibility is key here. We want you to be able to use it for the things that your unique community faces and the things that will help expand the services that you're already providing. Some of the higher things that some of the major things that we like to see with HAP funding is we want it to support regional coordination. We want you to coordinate with not only your city, county, COC region, but we want you to coordinate with service providers and other, points of contact within government that can help you, rev up your services. So we want to be able to expand or develop local capacity to address their immediate homelessness challenges in each community. So spending must be informed by best practices framework. We do have some information on what that is, but again, flexibility, best practices may vary between communities. So the focus is on strategic spending over allowable spending. That is very different from what a lot of folks are used to. So what I want to encourage here is with flexibility is if you have an idea on how you'd like to use HAP funds, don't consider it just that you're not able to do it because you weren't able to do it with other funding. Please reach out to Cal ICH and have a discussion about how the funds can be flexible and if we can support your needs for programming. Do not ever think of it as something that has limitations. I would say always reach out and ask questions. So if there are ways when your ESG-CV programs are ending, if there's a way that you need flexible funding to either carry them on or to maybe free up money in other areas, please reach out to us so that we can help strategize with you and figure out how to best carry on those programs for ESG-CV if you are interested. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about eligible uses. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of overlap in ESG-CV. So we have rapid rehousing and landlord incentives. Again, don't just think about it as those two things. If there are some creative ideas you have within that category, always, consider those and reach out to us for strategizing. So operating subsidies and reserves, street outreach, service coordination, which can mean a lot of things. Again, expand your minds on that one. System support for planning and regional partnerships, permanent housing, including hotel and motel conversion, interim sheltering, prevention and shelter diversion to permanent housing, and improvements to existing shelters. There are some stipulations with some of these eligible uses, but again, there is a lot here that is covered. And there was a chart that Chris had showed you earlier about when ESG-CV funds are out, that there are areas that will not be covered by regular ESG, and all of those areas are covered by HAP funding. Next slide, please. So with flexibility in HAP funding, there's flexibility in your budget revisions. So with each round of HAP, applicants were required to submit a budget, what they planned on doing with the funding. And that's important because we know you're planning with your community leaders and your community at hand. You're getting input from a lot of folks to figure out what you will do with the money. So that's a very important piece of us being able to provide the funding. But that doesn't mean that revisions can't be made. The flexibility goes even into revisions. So if you have at any point in the grant period, if you have a revision that you need to make to the original budget you submitted and the original plans that you had for the funding, please know that we are able to make those revisions and we are more than willing to accommodate those as long as they fall within the eligible uses of the funding, which again, also flexible. So I know that's easier said than done. There's a lot that goes into that planning, but if there's ever a reason that you get new funding or funding runs out and you need to adjust HAP funding, you're perfectly able to do that. And also, we do have a new process in which that you can do those budget revisions. We used to just request that you sent an email in and you asked us for a budget revision to your HAP dollars. We realize that's really encumbersome as time goes by with all the different rounds of HAP. So what we are doing now moving forward is all budget revision requests will be made through the quarterly fiscal reporting process. And to kind of finalize some of things about strategizing, we do have a lot of technical assistance available. And we have 4 categories we have technical assistance in right now, but they are broad. And if you do need help in any strategizing on how to continue programs, you can reach out to us for opportunities for a technical assistance provider to possibly reach out to you and see if there are ways that they can help strategize with you for your funding and to continue on projects that you may have. So the technical assistance we currently offer is in permanent housing strategies, youth programming, racial equity, and performance-based contracting. Again, those are also very flexible. So if there is a need that you see for strategizing, please reach out and we can link you up with a technical assistance provider and they may be able to help you with some of that. Next slide. We are always open for questions, for contact. If you'd like to contact me personally to talk about some things, I have my email address here, as well as my cell phone number. And then you can always reach out generally to the Cal ICH grants inbox. Both of those, that information is provided here. So I will turn it back over to Chris and I am available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Amber, and thanks, Heather, for that presentation. Next slide, please. So that was the end of our presentation today. Obviously, our Spotlight series now has the chance for discussion or questions. So thank you for joining us. We can take the slides down, Kim, and LaQuantia, you can see if we have any questions.
Don't currently see any in the chat right now, but if you do have questions, as Chris said, please feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute and ask your questions. And please don't be shy. We know that we are, the closeout period is a lot closer than we think. So we
Yes,
gotta have some questions.
I forgot to say this on my transition to you, LaQuantia, because I meant to. There's 185 days between now and September 30th. That doesn't seem like a lot to me.
Not at all.
Richmond, I hear you off mute.
So from Martha, Amber, her question is for you. Is HAP a new program?
All right, I thought I unmuted. So HAP is not a brand new program as it wasn't implemented this year, but it is fairly new as far as the state providing funding to grantees. So it has been around for the last 3 years, I should say. That's when funding started going out, was about 3 years ago. But whatever you're considering new, it's new for state funding, yes, but it's not a new program as in this last year.
Thank you, Amber. And from Diane, why would you not try to assist someone that is housed and in need of assistance before they become homeless and assisting them? Chris, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. If we can keep folks from becoming homeless, that is 100% our goal. I think our strategy in the state of California ESG-CV funding of not using homelessness prevention is twofold. One, homelessness prevention has oftentimes through annual ESG, and this was our experience with the last stimulus, which was called Homeless Prevention Rapid Rehousing Program, or HPRP. We saw a lot of funding that went into homelessness prevention that weren't for folks that were actually going to become homeless. And because these are such scant resources, we made the decision as the state to be very conscious of not spending money there. Plus, you had this billions of dollars of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP, that also came out of the CARES Act that was much closer aligned with preventing evictions and preventing folks from coming into homelessness. So certainly we can do homelessness prevention, but we want to have targeted, very specific programming. I think that is the answer, unless Heather has anything to add to it.
Nothing to add. I would have said the same.
Veronica, I see your hand is up. Might as well just keep on rolling since I'm talking and I see you.
Okay. I have a question for Amber. Kind of want to just set the scene a little bit. So here in Mendocino County, we've already identified our COCs. Oh, excuse us. Rapid Rehousing Case Manager. I'll have to call back later. So we are continuing like some of our shelter funding started under ESG-CV with HAP funding. And I got a question yesterday when I was explaining that to a member of the public, and they said, well, what are you going to do after 2025 whenever HAP is over? And it was specifically about the point in time count app, but it really got me thinking like, well, I'm hoping that the state will have some kind of, continuation of that, because we're going to be, launching programs that our communities are going to become dependent upon. Like our systems are going to require continuing them in order to continue at the capacity we're at. Is there any kind of discussion or idea? I know that that's like 2 years from now, but just it's on our minds.
Yes, Veronica, I appreciate that question. We get it all the time, and I understand the frustration and having to explain that to community members who aren't seeing like that this is continuous funding. And what I will say is, while I don't have information on how if future funding for HAP can be promised, that is something we advocate for at Cal ICH all the time. So everybody in our leadership team is always working on how do we show that the flexible funding that we are providing to grantees from the state is really helping, really assisting. And that's where we need your help, is when you're reporting things and when we're asking for feedback, that you're providing us with the successes of your programs and the ways that this flexible funding is really assisting your community. So I don't have an answer as to how we continue on the funding, because that decision's out of my hands. But what we can do is take the things that we're learning from our grantees, and we can take the things we're learning from our technical assistance providers when they're working with grantees, and try to put that forth to leadership and move that forward to, the legislature, and to get, more solid funding moving forward.
Do you think that the governor's office is hearing that message?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Amber. From Micah, with the last RFF being submitted by November 15th, do we just absorb all costs should admin be necessary? Heather.
Hey, Micah. Yes, you would. If you don't submit your RFF properly and there need to be additional adjustments, you would have to absorb those funds. HCD will have 6 weeks from November 15th to close the entire grant. So they will also be absorbing costs after December 30th if HUD has questions of them. So unfortunately, with one-time funding streams and expenditure deadlines, that's what happens.
And from Amy, regarding ESG-CV closeout, can you repeat what was said about property and vehicles?
Yes, thanks for that question, Amy. So you must have disposition policies for any property acquired or vehicles under other real property acquired according to 2 CFR. And those disposition policies must be in place in order for your grant to be closed out and for HCD to close out the grant. So that's something that your grant administrator and or your monitor will be talking to you about.
And I just added in the chat to support what Heather was saying. This is the California HCD disposition policy that was created last year. You can use that as a place to start. As Heather said, we don't typically do a lot of disposition in annual ESG because it's only 15 million, but with 315 million, there were more vehicles, there were more buildings, so much more to deal with at closeout than you have had typically. So definitely dig into that and return any questions you have to us. We'll figure it out.
Thank you, Heather and Chris. From RA, Amber, can you provide a clear explanation about the difference between prevention and diversion component with HAP and homelessness prevention with HUD?
Yes, so I'll do my best, but this is where we run into issues with the flexibility of HAP funding and the, I won't say non-flexibility, but the requirements around federal funding.
You can say non-flexible.
Okay. Well, So what I will say is everything that is funded through HUD federal funding for prevention will be funded through HAP. That is something I can say. If there are ideas that you have around what is a prevention strategy or a prevention effort and something that you feel would be successful in your community, that is something that can be explored with HAP funding. There are not a lot of black and white areas with HAP funding unless we have made a decision at Cal ICH, a policy decision, and then that sets precedent for the future decisions that we make around the funding. So I encourage you, if you have ideas around what would be prevention for your community, that you reach out to us so we can start talking about that, because it's very possible that that has not been a question that's been posed to us. So we haven't made a determination about it yet. I will say that prevention and housing first, maybe on different ends of the spectrum, but that's something we do follow and we do use a lens of constantly and consistently is, are these things a housing first practice or something that feels like it is violent, or if it is something that feels like it might be in a housing first violation or something that is restrictive to folks, then those are things that we don't really we think through more clearly, I'd say, and like try not to approve those things that we feel might be restrictive to people being able to participate. So I hope that was a little more clear, but please reach out with any ideas that you might have for creative ways to spend HAP funding.
Thank you, Amber. From Miriam, it sounds like continuing programs may require assembling budgets out of a few different funding sources. Could you tell us about how these different funding sources can fit together?
And I think I think the answer is definitely yes. I mean, Amber, I think you may say the same thing I'm going to say is like, feel free to reach out with what your specific funding sources are. And I think any of us are happy to try and problem solve that with you, because depending on what the funds are, will depend on how you braid them. But definitely we encourage braiding funding as you can with public and private funds. And I know that, Amber and her team are happy to help you think through those kinds of things too.
We did do a session on leveraging and braiding other funds last year. That's on our past trainings website, which came out of work that I believe Cal ICH did with, name's not coming to me, but Matthew Doherty.
Matthew Doherty,
There's actually a guide out there from Cal ICH about braiding and leveraging funds as well. So we have not only that document, but our training resource, Amber, that folks can refer to.
Absolutely. I just put the link in the chat for the Putting the Funding Pieces Together guide that we are consistently, we're always updating this. And so it has a video where they walk through the guide, and then it also just shows you the difference of how you can braid federal funding and ideas that might be helpful to you. I always say to use that as a resource and spread the word on it as well.
Thank you. From Micah, regarding reallocation, does our RFF submissions need to have a clear cutoff? Meaning, should we report reallocation reimbursements separately?
You mean for your CV funds? I'm assuming, Micah, is what you're asking.
Yeah, that'd be correct. CV funds.
For the additional RH you have?
Yes.
Marion, can you come off mute and answer that?
Yes, I can. Hi, everyone. No, Michael, you would not need to report these funds separately. We are tracking the additional allocations separately from the CV1, CV2 allocation. So the same RFF can be used, and we'll be tracking that separately on our end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Another question for Amber from Richmond. When are recipients going to receive reports on progress towards outcome goals? And also, when are recipients going to get information regarding HAP for status?
Great questions. And when Richmond is referring to outcome goals, I'm sure everybody on this webinar knows, though, this office hours knows, on HAP 3 and 4, there are system performance measures that we have, and we've asked grantees to create goals for those system performance measures. So Richmond's specifically asking about how they see their progress within meeting those goals that they've already set for HAP 3. And we are working currently on visualization dashboards. We actually just sent out an email to a lot of COCs yesterday about participation and getting feedback for those dashboards so that we can show visualizations of the progress that is made towards those towards those goals you set for the system performance measures. So, I'll give you a guess right now. It's been difficult getting the visualizations and the data accurate so that it will be helpful to COCs, but we're in a place right now where we think we're about 3 months out from providing some updates on where you're at and meeting those goals. And that's all using HMIS data that we upload into our HDIS system. And then I think there was a second part to that question, and it says also, when are recipients going to get information regarding HAP4 status? So you should be getting an award letter very soon. And then from there, we'll be sending out contracts for execution. So I don't have an exact date, but I know that the grant implementation side of things where at Cal ICH is working hard on getting those award letters out.
Thank you, Amber. I'm not seeing any more questions, but is there anyone else that has another question and wants to come off mute to ask your question? Or just go ahead and drop it in the chat. From Melissa, another one for you, Amber. Regarding HAP for eligible uses, service coordination, our COC is policy planning for racial equity with our racial equity coordinator. I'm sorry, okay. Would staff and training workshops be included?
So great question. And I think that the best way to approach this again is like, we want to gather some information because you know, that's not something that I can recall us like directly approving before, but it's not saying it's off the table. So if you could reach out to the Cal ICH grants inbox, then that team can kind of assess, you know, other areas where we've made these decisions possibly, and then get back to you on if that would be something, but it's something that we can explore.
Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions or any more hands raised, but remember, if at any point you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to your ESG representative at ESG NOFA, or reach out to your grant administrator. And remember too that these slides and this session will be emailed to you and posted on the website at a later date. Sorry, just making sure that I'm not missing something. Okay. All right. Well, remember that a quick survey will come up at the end of the session. So please make sure that you answer so that we can continue to bring you content that you absolutely need. Take care, and we'll see you all next week.